Shalom everyone, hope you're all well. So yesterday I was going through my open pages in Safari. I have a lot of pages open because when I watch something on YouTube or I want to watch something, I open it in a new tab so that I can have it there and I can, rewatch it and come back to it. And another thing which I had was an article which my husband had sent me many months ago, which I read and really loved, and I wanted to do a video on that as soon as I read it. However, unfortunately, here I am many months later doing it now. The article was by a Jewish person speaking about 1 Corinthians 7:1. It talks about touching the opposite sex, speaking to the opposite sex, and I thought it rather interesting because it's something that I definitely agree with. It's biblical, it's also Islamic, and it's something that I grew up with and I have a strong belief in. And so I want to get straight into it and read it for you and then also speak about it. Now, before I start, I do want to say that I did write a lot of notes down. Some of them are kind of written in paragraphs just so that I do not forget what I want to say. So if you do see me looking down, it's just because I'm reading. So I hope none of you actually mind that. But without further ado, here I am, and let's get started and read the article. The article starts with a brief summary, and it says, "The aim of this explanation of Holy Scripture is to share the interpretation and translation of 1 Corinthians 7:1, and how it speaks of the instruction to not touch the opposite gender, except for your spouse or certain close relatives. Such a practice can be deducted from both the Old and New Testaments, and also in both ancient and current Judaism as well. For reference, practice to not touch the opposite gender is known as negia and is defined to an extent for reference in the halakha, the oral and written Torah law combined. Further, linguistic sightings for the same ancient Greek word rendered touch from 1 Corinthians 7:1 will be shown in other verses found in the New Testament from a wide range of translations. To show consistency in how touch is the legal and valid translation, despite many other translations not following suit in this particular instance. Then the next subheading is begin. It talks about 1 Corinthians 7:1, KJV, and other translations. The verse reads as follows: "Now concerning the things whereof ye wrote unto me, it is good for a man not to touch a woman." And that's the KJV version. The NASB translation agrees with the KJV in this instance. However, many other translations will render the ancient Greek word touch differently, usually along the lines of sexual relations. And then it gives two examples from NIV and an ESV. It is good for a man not to have sexual relations with a woman. And the ESV, it is good for a man not to have sexual relations with a woman. Now the contextual justification, touch, instead of sexual relations in 1 Corinthians 7:1. Touching can lead to such immorality among unmarried people, and that is a support for the interpretation. For reference, verse 2 then goes on to speak of the temptation of sexual immorality, and the chapter recommends that if a person burns with passion, that believers should marry to avoid sinning. And verse is 1 Corinthians 7:2. But because of the temptation of sexual immorality, each man should have his own wife, and each woman her own husband. Verse 3 then goes on to state that physical marital intimacy is not forbidden, and it is a consensual and considerate thing for each spouse to do, and therefore they should not deny each other of it. With this, the other translations, which render verse 1 as sexual relations instead of touch, might appear to a reader as missing the sense and intention of this particular verse, minimizing and eliminating the opportunity for immorality to flourish. For sake of transparency, the chapter of 1 Corinthians 7 does indeed come with an exhortation to believers who marry their betrothed. and also a stronger one to the single believers who do not burn with desire and thus remain single. So that's 1 Corinthians 7:38. So then he who marries his betrothed does well, and he who refrains from marriage will do even better. And then he goes on to talk about the linguistic support. In 1 Corinthians 7:1, KJV, if we review the interlinear text, we see that the word rendered, touch, in the KJV and the NASB translations, is the Strong's Concordance Greek word number 680. Strong's G680 is also present in other chapters such as 2 Corinthians 6:17, where the word is also rendered as touch, though in a great number of other translations, as well as the KJV and the NASB. Further, in Luke 6:19, that very same ancient Greek word is also present and rendered as touch as well. And then it goes on to state the verse. It says, and the people all tried to touch him because power was coming from him and healing them all. And that was Luke 6:19. With the linguistic support, we can see that in this instance, the KJV and the NASB translations of 1 Corinthians 7:1 with the word touch are perhaps more accurate. This is also what we find when further contextual support with regard to social interactions and values is referenced from the Gospel and the Torah and shared along with the linguistic support, which I read above. Now we have contextual support in the Gospel and Torah. Talking to the opposite gender is surprising. John 4:27 perhaps provides us with a glimpse of ancient social moral expectations for conduct during the Second Temple period with regard to dealing with the opposite gender. John 4:27 states, just then his disciples returned and were surprised to find him talking with a woman. Here we see that even talking with a woman who is not a spouse or close relative in ancient times was a surprising thing to some. Smiling with the opposite gender is an indicator of marital status. The Torah further shows us that even the act of laughing with a woman in public was seen as a sign that a man is intimate with that woman and thus assumed to be married to her. It says in Genesis 26:8-9, Abimelech, king of the Philistines, looked out of a window and saw Isaac laughing with Rebekah, his wife. So Abimelech called Isaac and said, behold, she is your wife. So that's the end of the I grew up in a house, in a culture, and in a religion that taught exactly this, that followed this. And I love it, actually. I totally agree with it, and it's something that I'm actually used to because that's just how I grew up. I know that I can seem very extreme to some people, very strict when it comes to certain things, but I think that's also because of the way I was raised and in the environment and culture and religion which I was raised in. I'm actually thankful for that because I know that, I was raised with high morals and values and I'm very old-fashioned. I know that's a bit too much for some people, I guess, but that's just the way I am, and I appreciate things like the old-fashioned ways, how things used to be, and I think we would benefit a bit more if we also at least attempted and tried to follow the old biblical times. Not to that extent, I suppose, but I think when it comes to this topic in general, I think things have changed quite a lot, where, back in the day, it's like, don't talk to the opposite sex, don't touch the opposite sex. Now, everyone's touching everyone. It just, everyone's talking to everyone. Everything's just become normal. And so I think some things need to be re-evaluated, especially if you are married, so as to not cross that line and always speak to the opposite sex and get personal with them and become, best friends with them. You're married now, you need to take your covenant very seriously. And so I think back in the day, things used to be so much more simpler. I think harder in a way, because I think back in the day, they lacked many things, but also simpler. And I think some people at least used to be somewhat much happier back in that day. Women and men both knew their roles, knew their place, knew how to interact or not interact. But I think sometimes when I think of those days, when I read scripture, when I just even look at how society is now, how women and men are, I sometimes wish we could go back to those days, at least when it comes to morality, values, respect, loyalty. I think that is very important, which is lacking in today's society, in today's world, and in today's marriages, even. We live in a world today where both men and women have kind of no love or respect for their spouses. Sometimes we see married men, chatting to their female friends, hanging out, texting, talking all the time, getting personal. And of course, we see that with married women, especially with married women sometimes. You have literally no love or respect for your husband. You're hugging your male friends, you're kissing them on the cheek, you're chatting with them all the time, hanging out, getting personal. You kind of seem to have more time for your male friends than you do with your husband. And I think we need to take the marriage covenant seriously. And I think, married men and women need to act married. And, like I say, what business have you got as a married person to be getting personal with the opposite sex all the time? Chatting, spending all your time with them when you need to be spending that time with your spouse. And I think we also live in a society these days where social media has literally taken over, where people are spending most of their time on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter, and whatever else the kids are doing these days, interacting online with people instead of, socializing with their physical friends, spending time with their loved ones, with their spouses, with family members, making memories, living in the physical world as opposed to just spending hours on social media. And I think I want to do a separate, video on social media, because I think sometimes it can be somewhat idolized, and it is a problem because Facebook, as we know or should know, is, or was rather, created to distract people and get them addicted, and that's exactly what is happening. So I think that's something that also needs to be spoken about, which I will do in another video. But I think that's why I kind of like the olden days better, even though I wasn't there. It's just, it was different. It, people and families spent time with each other. They spoke, they hung out, they played games. Children too. Children are so desensitized these days to, as soon as they're born, play with iPads, watch YouTube, play video games. And I think to the days when even I was younger, I went outside to play. It wasn't, let's just watch YouTube on the phone. And so I think, back in those days, biblical times, they didn't have social media to distract them, and I think that is really, really, that's a good thing. And I think back in those days, people had way more morals and values. They lived biblically, at least the believers. They listened to Yahweh, they obeyed. Yahweh said something, or for us not to do, and it's like, okay, we won't do it. But now I feel like no one really cares about Yahweh. I think no one has any more a healthy fear of Yahweh. Everyone is just doing whatever they please, whatever pleases them, as opposed to what pleases Yahweh. I know that I'm very different because of the way I was raised. I'm definitely very old school, and I really like it and prefer it that way. Personally, I will not speak to another man, whether it's texting, phone calls, emails. You will not see me, walking off with a man, talking to them personally, one on one. You will not see me exchanging numbers, texting. Of course, if we are in a group environment, Sabbath fellowship or whatever, of course I'm going to be polite and say hi, how you doing? But as far as getting personal, that will not happen from me at all. whatsoever. I'm very, very strict when it comes to that because, for one, I have a love and a respect and obedience to Yahweh and then to my husband. Marriage, covenant, marriage actually means something to me. That's right, ladies. If you're married, get over the fact, of wanting to go hang out with your male friends and hug them and kiss them on the cheek and tell them everything that's happening in your life. You're married, okay? If you want to share your happy news with someone and, speak to someone, you have a spouse, okay? You speak to them. But that's just my opinion. Sorry if I sounded a bit too passionate there. It's just so many women really and literally have such disrespect for their spouses that when I see it, I'm like, wow, are you not married? Like, have some respect for yourself and for your husband. So I think that's just at least common sense to me. And so, you know, when I don't want to speak to other men or chat or text or email or communicate with men, it's because I really, really respect and love my husband. It's, I don't want to disregard, sorry, I'm getting tongue tied. I don't want to disrespect his feelings, disregard his feelings, and I certainly do not want to neglect him as my husband to be chatting online with people, especially males, texting them, getting personal with males. That's just never going to happen. And, I sometimes wish that that's just how it should be with everyone, like you're married, you don't need to get personal with another person of the opposite sex. You have that person that you've been waiting for your whole life, that you've prayed for your whole life. Now they're here. Spend some time with them. Don't neglect them by spending time with friends of the opposite sex, spending hours chatting to people online like you're married. Okay? Take your marriage seriously. And I think having said that, it's like, I am married now. What right on earth do I have to disregard, to disrespect my husband and his feelings and our marriage by chatting to other people, to chatting to other males, to getting personal with them, to texting all the time? It's just wrong, in my opinion. Now, if you are a man and you ever want to address me, which not going to happen, but if you do, I think the right thing is, biblically speaking, common sense, talk to my husband, talk to my master, and we'll talk about it. And if he feels that he needs to reply back to you, so be it. But yeah, everything's going through my beautiful husband, so that's all I can say. I received an email from a sister at the beginning of the month. It was addressed to my husband because they didn't know how to reach me, but my husband forwarded the email to me, and I really, really loved it because even though it was short and sweet, it showed so much consideration and respect, and I truly, truly loved it. It was a sister who is fairly new to the faith, and she wanted to reach out to me, and I was smiling from ear to ear. I just really, really loved how she even started the email, and it just reminded me of the old days where people had respect and morals and they actually cared. And so I do want to read the first sentence, and this is how the email started. She said, "I first wish to apologize, directing my email to your husband. I know that this is disrespectful." And I was like, wow, I love that. I mean, how beautiful is that? A woman, whether she's married or unmarried, is apologizing to me for addressing my husband, for sending him an email. And I was like, wow, she's apologizing for communicating with a married man. And I just loved it. I really, really love it. I still love it because it shows actual consideration for my feelings, in terms of, hey, I want to get in contact with you. I'm so sorry that I contacted your husband. I didn't know that this was disrespectful. And every time I open the message, I was like, I'm always just wow. That's all I have to say, really, because I think that is so beautiful. And we don't see that now. Women have such Jezebel spirits to the point where they don't care if they're married. If a certain man is married, they will just want to get personal. I mean, I mean, not even getting personal, it's just, they just don't care. And what's worse is, I feel they're disrespecting their husbands, and that's what really gets to me. You're a married woman, stay in your lane, so to say, be a homemaker, be that Proverbs 31 woman, instead of being all over the place, being worldly, especially if you are obviously a believing woman. Just live biblically. Have that standard of biblical living instead of just doing everything possible that the world is doing, or like doing everything that women of the world are doing and joining them and being feminized and being, alpha females. I mean, everything is just wrong in this world. Everything's just all over the place. Everything's upside down. And unfortunately, things are getting worse. But I think women really, especially women, need to know their place and live like virtuous, godly, holy women, as the Bible instructs us to do. And, me doing this video is not me saying, you can't communicate with the opposite sex ever. In the world that we live in, we need to, at least, when we go to the doctors or, people are asking us for help. But there is a difference between, I'm going to email this person, I need their advice or help or whatever. And then there's a difference between, I'm going to, as a married woman or as a married man, contact this person and want to get personal with them. I think we really need to have boundaries and limits and really be careful, because the devil's always there. Demons are always there. And they are, yeah, I need to really say it. We really need to be careful. And yeah, so that's my video. Sorry if it did seem like a rant or maybe a long video, but I did really, really enjoy that article that I read at the beginning, and I thought, wow, how things have literally changed. Just wow. And I don't mean to say wow, but sometimes I'm just so overwhelmed and lost for words, because sometimes that's all I can say, because things are just so wrong and things have changed so much from biblical times to now. And as I said, it might, even get worse. So we really need to be careful, and we really need to stay close to Yahweh